Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait to let attendees come into the webinar. So people are connecting. It shouldn't take that long. Bonjour tout le monde. On va juste attendre quelques secondes pour s'assurer que tout le monde se connecte à la conférence de presse. Ça ne devrait pas tarder avant qu'on commence. We're just going to wait a few seconds more to let folks come in and connect. On va attendre encore quelques secondes pour permettre à tout le monde de se connecter à la conférence de presse. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Vous êtes bien ici à une conférence de presse avec la députée de Churchill, Keewatinook Aski, Niki Ashton. Hello, everyone. You are connected to a press conference with NDP MP for Churchill, Keewatinook Aski. We will start in a few seconds. All right, Niki, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Nina. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Niki Ashton, and I am the MP for Churchill, Keewatinook Aski. I'm joining you from my home in Thompson, Manitoba on Treaty 5 territory, the traditional territory of the Nissachawasig Cree Nation. We are here today to send a clear message that in the fight against climate change, my bill, Bill C-245, is part of the solution. Bill C-245, an act to amend the Canada Infrastructure Bank, means leveraging public ownership in the fight against climate change and in support of the most marginalized communities in our country, Indigenous and Northern communities. Mon projet de loi C-245, qui apporte des changements à la Banque d'infrastructure du Canada, permettrait d'utiliser le levier économique de l'État pour lutter contre les changements climatiques et en appui aux communautés les plus marginalisées de notre pays, telles que les communautés autochtones et nordiques. Catastrophic climate change is a threat to our survival. Indigenous and Northern communities are on the forefront of climate change. Regions like ours have already been living the devastating impacts, and Indigenous and Northern communities do not have the infrastructure and resources to respond. This bill is about giving tools to communities to survive. This bill will change the way the Infrastructure Bank, a Crown corporation, does its work. The Infrastructure Bank was designed by billionaires for billionaires, and it's time to change that. In its 4 years of existence, Canada's Infrastructure Bank has yet to fund a project to completion. Instead, it's been an important tool in the privatization agenda, pushing for private-public infrastructure projects to disastrous results. We're going to change that. The fight against climate change requires bold, collective action. Canada's Crown corporations must be part of the solution. Canada's Infrastructure Bank must be part of the solution. By doing away with for-profit private agendas and focusing on public investment that is responsive to communities' needs, as well as ensuring Indigenous representation in its governance and transparency. Today, you will hear firsthand from First Nations that are already paying the price of climate change. You will hear from leaders who have been sounding the alarm and doing everything they can to find solutions. I'm honored to be joined by Chief Owen from Little Grand Rapids First Nation, Chief Owens from Pongasi First Nation, Chief Flett from St. Theresa Point First Nation, and Chief Redhead from Shamattawa First Nation. You will also hear from Angela McEwen, Senior Economist for CUPE National. And I'm so pleased to be joined by my colleague as well, the MP for Nunavut, Lori Idlout. From the need to transition away from diesel-generated power to the need for all-weather roads and an airport to the need for fire protection and flood mitigation, Indigenous communities need infrastructure support now. I want to also acknowledge the support of my colleague, Leah Gazan, who seconded this bill, the MP for Winnipeg Centre. It's time that Canada put people and our planet ahead of profit and built the infrastructure we all need to fight climate change. This bill is one important way forward. Thank you for being here. I'd like to now turn the remarks to the leaders from across our region, and I will first go to Chief Owen from Little Grand Rapids First Nation.
Chief, I think you're unmuted.
Chief Owen, I think you're on mute. Oh, there we go. I think we can hear you now. Chief Owen, can you hear us? I think we might have a technical issue. Perhaps, oh, can you hear us, Chief Owen? Maybe we'll try, maybe we'll go next to Chief Owens, who is joining us by phone. Chief Owens, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We'll go to you and then we'll go back to Chief Owen if that's okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Chief Owens calling. I'm calling from my home community, Pongassi First Nation, which is located by territory in northeastern Manitoba. I'd like to thank our MP Niki Ashton for inviting myself to join on this call. I'd like to share a little bit of information, our experience up here, based on what she had discussed and presented to us about this bill. Bill C-245, I believe it is. That Bill C-245?
245.
245, sorry. For ourselves, for our community, I guess we have seen the effects of climate change over the past few decades, and it is real. So I was kind of surprised, like when first told us about this Canada Infrastructure Bank. We've never heard of it. I've never heard of its existence and what how it's supposed to provide access to funds for isolated northern communities, build up the infrastructure, and it's something that we'd like to make use of and get some projects underway. One of the areas we're lacking, the main area we're lacking, is an airport. Our community, about 700 members. The only way in and out of our community is by float plane during the summer. During the winter, we have a winter road be getting shorter and shorter. The season seems to be getting shorter and shorter every year, and that's the time we have. That's the only time of the year we're able to bring in all our supplies for all our community like projects, and that throughout the year. We'd like to see something happen there where it's possibly an alternate route where the season is extended. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the recent evacuations over the past few years. We had 2 full evacuations and one partial evacuation, I believe. The last one being for 2021 from July to October for about a 3.5 month period, which was very disruptive. Also, the other areas we were looking at is maybe some investment in addressing like firefighting issue there. We haven't. These events that we face in terms of forest fires seem to be a recent events. I've spoken with a few of our elders and asked them if they've encountered that in the past, which they don't recall this occurring. So we'd like to see something happen in there for our community, and just to and just for us to be able to access these funds, these types of projects that we'd like to see happen here. Pangasi First Nation and our members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Owens of Pangasi First Nation. And I think we have Chief Owen from Little Grand Rapids First Nation on the phone. Chief Owen, can you hear us? We can't hear you yet. So maybe we'll go next to Chief Flett of St. Theresa Point First Nation. Chief Flett, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I'm honored to be here on your webinar. I would like to speak to the issue of the climate change. I thank you very much for inviting me. Of course, thoughts raced through my mind and heart when I heard of this opportunity for access to funds that would benefit our community and our people and our future generations. As it is my understanding that the main purpose of this presentation are to target projects pertaining to climate change. Strategic community planning, of which our people have been engaged in, has always included identifying community strengths, needs, barriers, and resources. As a leader in my community, it is my responsibility to take all of these into account when consulting with my people and making collaborative and sound directions. Taking this broad perspective and reflecting upon possibilities for projects is what causes thoughts to race through my mind, not unlike a flip book of images. And of course, one image, one item to acquire for us would be a fully functioning recycling program and facility. Another is education initiatives that identify how we can address the climate change issue. We also need energy efficient homes and alternative energy sources. And of course, accessibility of homes to water and sewage treatment, clean lakes and shores. One after another, these images and ideas flash. However, upon closer consideration of the feasibility and likelihood for success for these programs, it becomes evident that each one has major barriers in common with each other. This barrier poses a challenge because it limits availability of the materials and resources needed for such endeavors to flourish. One barrier is, of course, the location of our communities. I represent, of course, in this presentation, not just St. Theresa Point, but all the other Island Lake First Nation communities, Garden Hill First Nation, Osagamak First Nation, and Red Sucker Lake First Nation, along with my own community, St. Theresa Point First Nation. Our geographical location is inaccessible by land 80% of the year. With a trend in climate change, we are experiencing tribulations, trials of shortening our winter road season. Without accessibility, it is impossible for us to keep up with purchasing or maintaining equipment and materials that would be needed for any major project. Keeping this rationale in mind and knowing in my heart that this determination is what will best benefit our future generations, I am officially stating that a north-south all-weather road initiative to our community of St. Theresa Point and the Island Lake region is the project that would create opportunities and advantages for all our communities and all the initiatives and issues that we have. So in closing, of course, that is the main problem that we would like to bring to your attention, Nikki, and the government also, that we need to have an all-weather road on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. And that would be a big initiative. And I hope that you can bring this to the table at the federal government level and argue on our behalf. And of course, we will be there to support any other issues to convey them to you and your colleagues in Ottawa. So I thank you very much for allowing me this time to voice our concerns.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chief Flett, for being here and sharing this important message about the need for an all-weather road on the east side, given the devastating impacts of climate change. I do want to try again to go back to Chief Owen from Little Grand Rapids First Nation. Chief Owen, I know you've connected with us by phone now. Can you hear us? I'm not seeing the unmute. So maybe we'll go to our next guest, Chief Eric Redhead of Shamattawa First Nation, and we'll try Chief Owen again right after that. Thank you so much for joining us, Chief Redhead.
Good morning, Nikki, and good morning, Chiefs. I'm Chief Redhead of Shamattawa First Nation, and I guess one of the benefits of seeing this bill passed would be connecting Shamattawa to the main hydro line. Right now, Shamattawa is dependent on burning dirty diesel in order to heat our homes, to turn on lights, and to generate power for the whole community. You know, it's 2022, and I think it's time we bring Shamattawa forward into 2022. And so I'd really like to see this bill passed and all parties support it in order for us to make real changes when it comes to climate change and impact on our environment. And you know, we're talking about all season road, and that's another thing that Shamattawa would like to see. Every year our road gets shorter and shorter. The life of our winter road gets shorter and shorter. And so it's a rush to bring in goods, to bring in diesel, to bring in food, housing material, all this other stuff. That window of opportunity shrinks every year due to climate change. But I think one of the most important things to mention too is that we've spent millions and millions of dollars cleaning up our soil, cleaning up our environment because of dirty diesel, contaminated soil. The health of our members are really, really important. So we need to transition away from dirty diesel to clean energy. And one of the ways of doing this is to passing MP Ashton's bill in the House of Commons. So that's really what I'd like to say for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chief Redhead, and for that very clear message shared by many communities, including in the far north, represented by my colleague MP Lori Idlout, who we will hear from in a few minutes. Before we move forward, I do want to try Chief Owen as well, who has indicated that he has tried unmuting on his end. Chief Owen, can you hear us? It shows that you're muted on the screen. Can you hear us? Hello, Chief Owen?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go. Terrific.
Okay. Wow. Finally.
Thank you, Chief Owen. This is, we'd love to hear from you. Reminder, Chief Owen, the Chief of Little Grand Rapids First Nation. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I could hear you guys when you were talking. So, yeah, we're talking about the all-weather road on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. And, you know, I do agree that we need to have that. Like it affects our communities. You know, for us at Little Grand, and we have to take a vehicle down to the dock, and then, you know, if we have to medevac or evacuate anybody, we have to take a vehicle down to the dock, onto the boat, and then onto the shoreline, onto the vehicle again to the airport. So we have a really need for a road to go from our community to the airport. And it's the same thing with Pongasi. I heard Chief Owens there talking a little bit there before. I got cut off there. So we really do need that all-weather road. There's no doubt about that. So another thing is forest fires. Like in the summertime, we need like forest fire protection. And we had our hydro line burned down it went about 10 miles to Little Grand. And now there's, we still have green space from 10 miles west of Little Grand all the way to Pongassi. And we're probably going to have another, if there's a forest fire this coming summer, we're probably going to be having another evacuation. So we do need to do something about the surrounding area of our communities. I'm not sure how to maybe clearing area maybe. So we really do need to do something about that. I'm not sure if there's anything else I can say that we really do need something to happen here by way of all-weather road, protecting the community. And we also, I'll touch on a little bit about we need the infrastructure in the community. Like right now we have, a nursing station. It's very small, and we need our, all our programs to be under one building. Right now we're scattered all over the place, and nobody can do their jobs properly. So I think that's about all I have to say for now. I'm a new chief that just came in, and we've got lots of work to do. So thank you for listening. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you very much, Chief Owen, and for sharing what your community has been through. Again, Little Grand Rapids, along with Pongassi First Nation, 2 First Nations here in Manitoba that were evacuated for 3.5 months this year because of devastating forest fires. Thank you for being here to share what your community needs. Before we move on to the next speakers, I want to reiterate, you've heard examples of critical projects that First Nations, Indigenous communities need in the face of devastating climate change, the need for an all-weather road on the east side of Lake Winnipeg, and all-season roads across the region, an airport for Pongassi, which is completely isolated for a good chunk of the year, sustainable housing, and very importantly, the transition from diesel to green energy, a critical step in mitigating the impacts of climate change by significantly reducing the carbon footprint of communities that have no choice but to depend on diesel at this time. These are the kinds of projects the Infrastructure Bank could be funding. It is the kinds of projects that they are not funding. And what we're saying through this bill is that has to change. Our next 2 and final speakers are Angela McEwen, the senior economist for QP National. Angela, you're next.
Thank you very much, Nikki. This is an issue that I've been following for a long time. We followed the Canada Infrastructure Bank back when it was P3 Canada, and they were funding only private-public partnerships. And it was a Liberal promise to change that and make P3 Canada into a public bank that would finance these types of public infrastructure. And it didn't end up happening after the election. So the Canada Infrastructure Bank, once it was set up, continued that focus on, with new language, they talked about crowding in private financing. But as we've heard, the most critical infrastructure needs in Canada aren't ones that have a profit attached to it. It's basic infrastructure that is needed for communities to go about their daily lives. And so this is exactly the type of infrastructure that should be publicly financed because it's much cheaper to finance it publicly, and it should be publicly owned so that it benefits the broader public, and so that it's designed in that way to benefit the most people. That's where you get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of this type of critical infrastructure that communities need, again, just to go about their lives. And much of our current infrastructure gap is in public services, it's in climate infrastructure. And so that's why it's so important to have this at the same time that we're talking about public financing, which is cheaper, public ownership, which is guaranteed to serve the broader needs of the community, that we're also talking about having this climate lens, because that's the additional benefit that we get where we're saving costs that we're going to see in the future. Communities are only, those roads are only going to have shorter and shorter lives. And so those communities are only going to face increasing costs in the long run. So the sooner we can get started on putting this infrastructure in place for communities, that we're actually preventing future costs. So that's where we get the biggest public bang for our buck, is investing those things. And I think that's all I have to add right now, but I'm really excited to see this project, because this is what we've been asking for at CUPE, in the broader labor movement, broader progressive economists, for this, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, to move to a public financing model and to focus on climate infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Angela McEwen. You've been a leading voice on the way in which the infrastructure bank is not working for Canadians and Canadian communities, and I really appreciate your support, as well as the support of other Labour leaders, including the President of the Canadian Labour Congress, B. Brusk, as well. We really appreciate your support on this bill, and look forward to pushing it forward alongside you and communities across our region and the country. And finally, I'd like to turn to my colleague, the MP for Nunavut, Lori Idlout. Thank you for joining us, Lori.
Qoyanamik sivulang met takwa sivuraktu katayo qoyara katawaka ikayok tuing mata nikyo pigakti tangan tamanna pimmagerong mat ikayo sityevo yun nang mat no nakakaksimayunon. I just wanted to first thank you, Niki, and to the leaders that have joined us in this important initiative today. I think that what you've proposed in this bill is an important initiative for all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Canada to see improvements. I just wanted to briefly re-emphasize some things that have already been said about the unfortunate impacts Nunavut experience on a daily basis because of infrastructure troubles. A lot of all 25 of the communities that I represent in Nunavut run on diesel. And so improving this legislation, I think, will help to make sure that we have funding that can be applied by public organizations like the Kudlik Energy Corporation, so that they can move towards sustainable development. I think that this piece of legislation is an important way to ensure that we can invest in sustainable infrastructure projects. And I think that through this legislation, we could see many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit applying to be self-reliant so that they can choose on their own what projects that they will focus on in the communities that they represent. Finally, I just wanted to mention as well that this is an important improvement for reconciliation to be realized. If the Liberal government chooses not to approve this bill, I think it will be a terrible message to send out to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, because allowing this bill to pass will allow First Nations, Métis, and Inuit organizations, governance structures, corporations to be able to move towards relying on their own resources to focus on impacts that they know could be beneficial to communities in a sustainable way. We all know that First Nations, Métis, Inuit, we all have a huge focus on environmental protection and making sure that we're doing our best to manage the land, the water, and the wildlife. And we know what's important to protect the environment around our territories, and allowing this legislation to go through will allow First Nations, Métis, Inuit to prioritize on how to raise funds that will have a better impact and that will move away from damage causing infrastructure. So I really appreciate your willingness to include me in this important messaging that we must share with all Canadians.
Thank you so much, Lori Idlout, the MP for Nunavut, for your powerful words. And that is indeed what we are calling for today. We are calling for all party support for Bill C-245, an opportunity to take action on climate change, to leverage public ownership in the fight for climate change in support of communities that are already paying the price, Indigenous communities and Northern communities. We want to make sure that there are solutions being put forward by this federal government where there are none right now to address the increasingly devastating impacts of climate change in communities across our country. And with that, I would like to thank everyone who spoke today that joined us from across our region: Chief Owen, Chief Owens, Chief Flett, Chief Redhead, Angela McEwen, MP Lori Idlout. And now we are open to taking any questions folks might have.
Thank you very much. So I would like to invite members of the media, if you have a question, to please use the raise hand function for a question and follow-up. J'aimerais ça inviter les membres des médias qui ont des questions. Veuillez utiliser la fonction lever la main au bas de la page pour une question et une question de suivi. When I call your name, I would just ask you to please identify your media outlet as well. So I will go ahead with Fraser Nidam. Please go for it.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I guess what I was wondering is what type of money, if these changes went in with the infrastructure bank, would communities be able to leverage? Are we talking millions, billions, or what kind of area of funding would be available?
Well, first off, the bill is it is a private member's bill, and so we work with the parameters of the House when it comes to private members' bills, which there are limitations when it comes to directing money. But what our hope here is, by changing the Act, what we are doing is putting the infrastructure bank in certainly solidifying its role as a Crown corporation, and pushing it to leverage funding and investment in similar ways as other Crown corporations like Export Development Canada, other entities like CMHC, and certainly allow for greater investment, and we hope as well creative ways of investing, like an example that's been presented by many progressive economists, the use of green bonds, for example. We certainly, our intent is to change the Act and push the infrastructure bank in a direction where government resources and as well as the resources of other public entities are leveraged in ways that that allow for the greatest support for projects that are necessary, much like we see the ability from other Crown corporations as well.
Okay, and maybe just
Angela, did you want to add to that, please?
Yeah, I just want to add to that the Canada Infrastructure Bank is already capitalized with $35 billion that they can invest. And so what Niki's bill does is just reorient the prioritization for investing that money into these types of projects that we're talking today, instead of what their current priority is looking for private partners to find projects that generate some kind of profit for the private partner. So it's just reorienting where that existing money would go.
Okay, and just to follow up that, it sounds, not that familiar with this bank or how it came into being, but it sounds like the intention, or what the NDP is saying anyways, the intention was for it to be a public sector type of bank, but this got changed somewhere along the line after the election, if I'm correct. And then I have some ideas of my own, but maybe you could just outline why the private sector would not be able to fulfill, if they are searching for private funds, would not be able to fulfill some of these infrastructure needs. So I know that's more than one question.
No, I'll start off, and actually maybe given your work, Angela, if you wouldn't mind adding to it as well. First off, the Infrastructure Bank is a creation of the Liberal government. Former Finance Minister Bill Morneau was a big driver of it. And I think certainly if you look at sort of the public relations side of it, it was certainly brought up as a bank, a public entity that could address the growing infrastructure needs of Canadians in general, and what we're saying is that the bank is a failure, right? It has not seen one project to completion. Its for-profit motive is not something that fits the kinds of infrastructure needs communities have. And then if you add the climate change piece, we need bold action now, and the Infrastructure Bank is not equipped to deal with that. So what we need is a change in direction and improvements across the board. So we're suggesting moving out cutting out the private investment, cutting out the for-profit, which again has been proven to be disastrous in other ways for communities, but also adding Indigenous representation to the board, which is non-existent at this time, and transparency, the need for annual reports, which is also not required by the bank at this time, which I think would be pretty shocking to most Canadians, given the amount of money that they have to work with. So what we're suggesting in the NDP, we've been very critical of the Infrastructure Bank over the years, and we're certainly seeing this bill as a way to fix it, and what we hope will be done urgently to address the needs in the context of the climate crisis, and with particular priority given to Indigenous and Northern communities. Angela, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the story that the narrative when the Infrastructure Bank was created after the election was that there was a whole bunch of private sector money out there that was looking to be put to good use and could be put to sort of environmental social goals, but they needed, private money to help facilitate it. But that narrative turned out to not be true. They had a real problem finding private sector partners that were looking for this type of thing. So it was really a solution in search of a problem. It wasn't the gap that they identified in the market. The market disagreed. The market was like, no, thanks, we're fine. We can invest in things on our own. And the stuff that we need, our actual infrastructure gaps, are places where there is no profit there, which is why they're current gaps, right? The market hasn't addressed these problems because there's no profit for them. And so that's where the private sector or the public sector really needs to step in and do that for benefit. We're talking about water and wastewater. We're talking about roads to communities. We're talking about getting off diesel, so clean energy. Those types of projects, there's the reason that they haven't happened is because there's no profit there. And so the cheapest way to finance it is by the public sector. The federal government can borrow at 2%. So the Canada Infrastructure Bank, as an arm of the federal government, as if it were a full crown corporation, would have access to that cheaper financing. And so would be able to support communities in making these investments. Right now, municipalities and First Nations communities can't borrow on their own. So that's a barrier for them to investing the money on their own to build these investments. So borrowing from the Canada Infrastructure Bank, having that public bank be the financing agent for these communities to get these projects started is really, really important. And so the Canada Infrastructure Bank, you'll find if you look over the past few years, it's rejigged a bit a couple of times trying to address these concerns, but it's never really come back to that initial goal of being a public bank. And there are lots of places in Canada and globally where we have public banks that are being used to address climate change. There is BC has a bank for municipalities that loans to them. And so this is really a good role for the public sector, for the Canada Infrastructure Bank, to enable that type of investment in communities, particularly where climate change is so, these communities are already feeling the costs, right? And so it's really urgent that we step in and help them out.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to go to Natasha Belowski with the National Observer. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So my first question for Niki is, what parts of your bill do you anticipate pushback on, or maybe the most pushback is a better question?
Oh, where to begin? Yes. Well, first off, um, what we're saying here, it really starts from the premise of the fact that the National Infrastructure Bank is a failure, right? It is not meeting its intended goal. It is not delivering for communities in the very desperate way communities need response, and it's also not in tune with the crisis of our time, right? The crisis of climate change, and so for us, it wasn't. It was critical that we put forward a changes to the act that really seek to reform the infrastructure bank and reorient it in the direction that frankly it was intended to go. And it's interesting because the Liberals have both talked about the need for public investment in some ways around infrastructure. They've also talked about, and we've certainly seen this since the last election, a desire to have a legacy as climate champions. And so what we're saying is put your money where your mouth is and your votes in support of this bill to make the Canada infrastructure about that, right? And both in terms of leveraging public investment through public ownership and recognizing the importance of the climate change crisis, the need to act now. And of course, the Liberals have talked a good talk on reconciliation. And my colleague Lori Idlout pointed to this. This bill is about reconciliation. You've heard today that the frankly heartbreaking situation that so many communities here in our region, for example, are facing. We've heard of other First Nations and Northern communities that have been hammered by forest fires, flooding, droughts, and melting ice. And so what we need here is a government that recognizes that reconciliation also means investment in critical infrastructure for Indigenous communities now. And so I think that we can find agreement on all fronts, and that really frankly starts with the premise that the infrastructure bank has been a failure and hasn't delivered for Canadians the way it was meant to.
Thank you. And also, it's great to hear from so many folks today. And I think my next question is probably best directed to Lori. I'm wondering how significant would it be to have representatives for Inuit, Métis, and First Nations communities at the Canada Infrastructure Bank on its board?
Natasha, I think there could be significant investments in Nunavut. There are public organizations that have been trying to raise funds for sustainable projects, like the city of Iqaluit, who has been wanting to try and get a hydro project to transition away from diesel. So there are important examples like that within Nunavut communities that we could see significant improvements on, so that we can stop relying on diesel, so that we could see investments in fiber optic internet, increasing the bandwidth and reliability on other infrastructure that we know could help make improvements for all Nunavut communities. So I could see specific examples in Nunavut for sure, where these investments, if drawn upon, could make ensuring that we're assisting to combat climate change.
Thank you very much. So I see that we have no more questions. I will pass it back to Niki for closing.
Thank you so much, Nina, and thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. You've heard a clear message that the climate crisis is here. Indigenous and Northern communities are already paying the price. We need bold collective solutions now. We need the federal government to play a leadership role. And one of the ways it can do that is by changing the direction of the infrastructure bank, a public entity, a crown corporation that should be there in support of Canadians, not in support of billionaires and their profits, corporations and their profits, but in support of communities in the face of the greatest crisis of our time. I want to thank Chief Owen, Chief Owens, Chief Flett, and Chief Redhead for taking the time to share their words and the struggles of their communities, the need for an all-weather road, the need to transition from diesel, or as dirty diesel, as Chief Redhead pointed out, to green energy, the need to invest in an airport for a community like Pongassi, and the desperate need for forest fire protection. As we know, the climate emergency is only becoming greater. This bill is our opportunity to act now to make a difference for communities across our country, with particular priority in Indigenous and Northern communities. I want to thank Angela McEwen, somebody who's been at the forefront of critiquing the bank and showing a way forward, and really who's been a strong voice in the need for public ownership to be part of the solution in fighting climate change. That's something that we are saying is critical going forward. And finally, I want to thank my colleague, Lori Idlout, who's such a strong voice for Nunavut, for Northern communities, and I so appreciate her support and the support of my colleagues in pushing a way forward, a way that is rooted in hope and tangible action by redirecting the Canada Infrastructure Bank and making crown corporations like the Infrastructure Bank work for our communities in the face of the climate crisis now. Thank you so much, and we look forward to keeping you in tune on our campaign going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. This concludes our press conference. Ceci met fin à une conférence de presse.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you, Chief Flett. I'm not sure if everybody's still online. Chief Redhead, Chief Owens, Chief Owen. I know everybody's very busy. I so appreciate what you've shared, and we'll be in touch about the next steps. Thank you.